As I left the courthouse that day, I found myself smiling, for my arrogant husband didn't know the most important thing. I sat on the couch in our Upper East Side apartment, staring into space, my thoughts fading into thin air. The silence that once brought me comfort in this home now felt suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. After 20 years of marriage to Charles, divorce had become inevitable, and that realization crushed me like a wave of concrete. The photos on the walls now seemed to represent someone else's life: beach vacations, Sean's birthdays, happy, spontaneous moments thrown back at me. Those memories felt distant now, as if they belonged to a stranger, not to the woman I used to be. The Melissa in those photos was a different person, smiling and content, believing life would continue without any major surprises. How did everything change so dramatically? Charles was the man I had dreamed of growing old with, the person I thought I'd built a life with, at least that's what I believed. But all that effort, all that love, seemed to have vanished in years of arguments, distance, and silences that were never resolved. Only my pride in Sean kept me going, my brilliant son who had graduated as an outstanding student in genetic engineering. Sean was my driving force, the reason I endured this exhausting marriage, though even the joy of his academic success couldn't ease the deep pain eating away at me now. That day, Charles's betrayal reached new depths that I never thought possible. While reviewing the divorce papers, I discovered a shocking truth that nearly brought me to my knees. The home we'd lived in for over 10 years, our sanctuary, wasn't mine at all. Charles had secretly used legal means, with his mother's help, to change the deed to his name alone. This fact left me shocked and breathless. Everything I had taken for granted was being stripped away from my grasp, piece by painful piece. I jumped up from my seat, unable to remain still as my world crumbled around me. In the midst of my collapsing reality, I berated myself for being so defenseless, so trusting. For years, I had believed in Charles, convinced we had a relationship built on mutual respect despite our difficulties. Now I realized how blind I had been, how foolishly trusting. I paced the room like a caged animal, my mind a storm of anger and pain, each emotion fighting for dominance. With trembling fingers, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. My voice was strong, but inside I felt weak. After I hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over me. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could still fight for what remained, and that thought gave me a strange sort of strength. This wasn't just about a house or money anymore, it was about my dignity and my future. I wouldn't let Charles take everything away from me. Looking through the window at the Manhattan streets below, I watched life continuing as if nothing had happened, but for me, this was the beginning of a battle. I didn't know if I could win, but I was ready to fight with everything I had. Night fell over the city, but it brought me no peace. I tossed and turned in bed several times, the weight of the silence crushing me. The memories of my relationship with Charles were bitter, but the memories surfacing now were even darker, deeper, like a well with no bottom. His betrayal hadn't just shaken my present, it had stirred up shadows from my past that I tried so hard to forget. I closed my eyes, trying desperately to block it all out, but the thoughts wouldn't stop coming. I clearly remembered the face of my ex-boyfriend, Jeremy. He was the first person to teach me what it meant to be truly loved. The days we spent together were special, filled with a pure connection I knew I'd never experience again. But tragedy had torn him from my life far too soon. I remember the day Jeremy died in that accident with perfect clarity, as if it were seared into my memory. The sense of loss was beyond words, beyond comprehension. I was pregnant with Sean at the time, and losing Jeremy felt like losing a part of myself. The pain tore through me like a knife, but the responsibility of bringing my son into the world gave me strength, at least, that's what I thought. But a few months later, when I was rushed to the hospital with pregnancy complications, I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. Yet that was only the beginning of my nightmare. Sean, the only connection I had left to Jeremy, died during childbirth. Something inside me broke forever that day. The world crushed me, and life felt unbearably cruel. All the plans and dreams that Jeremy and I shared were gone. In that hospital, I met a woman named Olivia, her eyes holding the same sadness, carrying her own pain like a heavy cross. She too had experienced tragedy, and in our shared confusion, she made me a proposal. She suggested exchanging my deceased baby with a newborn who had no mother. The suggestion seemed foolhardy, but to a broken part of me it seemed the only hope it could find in the darkness, so I saw it as my only option. After all, the baby Olivia proposed had no one to care for him. In my desperation, I made a choice I never thought I would. When I brought Sean home, I held him as if he were my own flesh and blood. He became my reason to keep living, my only comfort in an infinite tragedy. I never told anyone this secret, not even Charles. It became a part of me, something I would never speak of, for fear that if it came to light, I might lose my son forever. But now, that past was threatening to surface like a dark secret rising from the depths. Charles, cold and calculating as ever, had started hinting that he knew more than I'd ever imagined he could. His vague comments and subtle references to the past made me tremble like a leaf in a storm. If he knew about the baby exchange, he would use that information to destroy me in court. I knew that as surely as I knew my own name. Charles was the kind of man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. I twisted in my bed again, thinking of Sean, who had grown into such a strong, intelligent man with a promising future. He was my greatest pride, the one I'd raised with unconditional love that no truth could ever change. But how would he react if he learned I wasn't his biological mother? I was filled with fear. The first rays of dawn lit up my face through the window of my Manhattan apartment. I knew I would have to confront Charles soon, not just for the apartment, but for this dark secret that could surface at any moment. The storm was approaching, and I had to prepare for the worst. The day of the trial arrived, and I walked down the courthouse hallway, with a mix of tension and determination in every step. The cold, inorganic walls were like the atmosphere I had been living in for the past few weeks, a silent but fierce battle to protect what was mine. Only the echo of my footsteps kept company with my thoughts. For a moment, I felt completely alone in this fight, another blow to my already wounded pride. I understood that this hearing was just the beginning, and what was really at stake wasn't just the apartment, but my dignity, and my past itself. My lawyer sitting next to me gently squeezed my arm, reminding me that this wasn't over yet. I took a deep breath and glanced sideways at Charles. He had no idea who he was up against now. I was no longer the woman who would watch things fall apart without fighting back. I was ready for battle now. The hearing dragged on with legal technicalities and signed documents that Charles claimed were valid. But beneath those words lay an undercurrent of tension that I could feel in my bones. I knew my ex-husband wouldn't be satisfied with just winning the apartment. He wanted more. His satisfaction would come from defeating me, completely, crushing me in every possible way. During the break, while the lawyers were conferring with the judge, Charles approached me. I watched his movements from the corner of my eye, my shoulders tense, but I wasn't surprised. I knew Charles never moved without purpose. He smiled that sardonic smile that had been driving me crazy for years and suggested we could make this easier on each other. "You'll end up losing everything," he told me, "just accept what's rightfully coming to you." I stared at him, fighting the urge to argue back, thinking how empty the word rightfully sounded coming from his mouth. "You won't fool me again, Charles," I replied, calming my voice. "I won't bow to your terms, not today, not ever." Charles tilted his head slightly, as if he'd expected this response all along. But his next words knocked the breath right out of me. "Oh, really? Just imagine how Sean might react if he knew what happened when he was a baby," he whispered with contempt, leaning close enough that only I could hear. For a moment, time seemed to freeze in that Manhattan courthouse corridor. The threat was crystal clear. Charles knew, or at least suspected, my deepest secret. This wasn't just any piece of information he was hinting at. This was my lifelong secret, the dark memory I'd carried in my heart all these years. Instead of showing weakness, I stood tall. Charles's eyes searched for any reaction, but he didn't find what he was looking for. Even though I was filled with fear, I did not crumble. Something stronger had awakened inside me, something fiercer than fear. I was ready to fight not just the legal battle, but to protect my son at all costs. Though I wasn't prepared to reveal the truth, if Charles thought this threat would make me back down, he was making a terrible mistake. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Charles," I said with quiet determination. "This isn't over." He returned to his seat with that arrogant smile of his, but I didn't take my eyes off him for a second. No matter how dark the truth might be, I wouldn't let him use it as a weapon to destroy me. Sean was my son, my greatest pride, and I would face anything for him. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur, my mind focused on what had just transpired. When the judge declared a recess, I left the courtroom knowing the real battle was just beginning. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the courthouse floor. I walked slowly toward the hearing room, my steps firm but my insides churning like a storm at sea. I knew this day's confrontation would be decisive. This wasn't just about an apartment anymore, it was about my sense of justice itself. Charles wanted more than just material possessions. He wanted to humiliate me completely, and that was something I absolutely could not forgive. The lawyers began presenting their arguments in the Manhattan courtroom. Charles's lawyer, with an arrogant tone that made my skin crawl, portrayed me as emotionally unstable and financially incompetent. He argued that the apartment should remain with Charles. It was a dirty tactic, but an effective strategy. As the lawyer spoke, I felt like I was being stripped of more than just material possessions. His words echoed through the courtroom, carefully crafted to destroy my credibility. Charles just stared at me, the whole time, enjoying watching me suffer. When my lawyer began the rebuttal, I tried to focus, knowing this battle had to be fought in the courtroom. But the atmosphere made me feel vulnerable, exposed in ways I'd never experienced before. This vulnerability came not just from the financial arguments, but from the constant fear that Charles might expose my secret at any moment. Every time Charles looked at me, I worried this would be the moment he revealed the truth about Sean. I was nervous when Charles took the stand. I knew this moment would be crucial. He stood at the witness stand with a calm demeanor, clearly confident in his position of power. His lawyer led him through gentle questions about how he'd secured the family's financial stability and how I had supposedly shown no interest in economic matters. Everything focused on proving I lacked the ability to manage what we'd built together. Then, casually, he dropped the word secrets. It seemed light, almost throwaway, but to me, the whole courtroom crackled with tension. My body went rigid, and when the judge looked up, time seemed to stand still. "Everyone has things in their past that others don't know about," Charles said in that calculated tone of his. "But we don't need to discuss those here, do we?" His words were laced with poison. I felt as if I'd been stabbed with an invisible blade. The implicit threat told me everything. Charles wouldn't stop until he'd wounded me in the most cruel way possible. For now, though, he was avoiding direct statements, just toying with my fears and anxieties. It was his way of reminding me he was in control. My eyes met the judge's. She seemed interested in Charles's comment but didn't pursue it further. The hearing continued, but for me, it had taken on a new tension. I felt like I was fighting not just for my home now, but for my peace of mind. When it was my turn to testify, I felt every eye in the courtroom focused on me. I'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. I needed to show strength. I refused to fit into the image of a fragile woman that Charles was trying to paint. I took a deep breath, stood up, and faced the judge, then my lawyer, and finally Charles himself. He was watching me, with that sardonic smile that made my blood boil. "I've been a part of this family for 20 years, I began, my voice unwavering like I'd practiced in front of my mirror countless times. I raised Sean, supported Charles's career, and built this home with my own hands and heart. Now Charles is trying to erase all of that, to make it seem like it never happened. But I am not an invisible woman, and I won't let him rewrite my history as he sees fit." Every word I spoke carried the weight of truth, and there was no hesitation in my voice. Over the years, I had watched my marriage crumble as Charles gradually pushed me out of every decision. But this wasn't just about finances, it was about respect. That day, in that courtroom, I was determined to reclaim my voice. When I finished speaking, the courtroom fell silent. The judge nodded slowly, made some notes, and declared the day's proceedings over. I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high, though I knew in my heart that an even bigger battle lay ahead. The clock showed 9 p.m., but time felt frozen for me. The shadows in my home, once a source of comfort, now felt oppressive. A suffocating atmosphere filled the apartment. In the quiet before the storm, I knew I was facing a pivotal moment. The secret I'd kept hidden for so many years was about to surface. Sean, the most precious person in my life, would soon have to face this truth. It was a truth that could change everything. Sitting on the sofa, my hands tightly clasped, my thoughts kept circling back to the same question: how do I tell him? The pain of losing Jeremy, and then losing my biological son, had left deep scars that never fully healed. The baby exchange at the hospital had been a desperate decision born from despair. For years, I tried to bury that moment, even hide it from myself. But now Charles was threatening to destroy it all. Sean walked into the room, smiling at something on his smartphone. I watched him with love, but also with fear gripping my heart. It wasn't easy to meet his eyes, knowing that our mother-son relationship could crumble with just a few words. "Mom, are you okay?" Sean suddenly asked, putting away his phone and sitting down in front of me. I nodded, but the tightness in my chest made it hard to breathe. Nothing was okay. I wanted to protect him, that hadn't changed. But I knew I couldn't keep hiding the truth anymore. "We need to talk," I said. I finally spoke up in a weak voice. Sean frowned when he noticed the tremor in my voice, concern spreading across his face like a shadow. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, giving me his complete attention. "What's wrong?" His gentle voice seemed to try to lift some of the weight from my shoulders. I looked down, fidgeting with my hands in my lap, searching for words that refused to come easily. The words wouldn't come, but I knew this was the moment. "There's something I've been hiding all this time," I finally began, feeling very nervous. Sean watched me silently, his expression a mixture of expectation and anxiety. "When you were born, things happened differently than what I've told you." The silence in the room became heavy, almost suffocating. Sean straightened up, clearly confused, questions already forming in his eyes before I could continue. "What do you mean?" he asked, and I swallowed hard. I felt years of pain and was filled with suppressed emotions. "Jeremy died before you were born," I said, my voice shaking as I recalled the memories. "And when I went to the hospital to give birth, everything went wrong. There were complications, and I lost the baby." My words fell like heavy stones in the quiet room. Sean blinked, struggling to process what I was saying. But how? Confusion was written all over his face. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and continued. The weight of the truth was crushing me, but I had to keep going. I couldn't bear it. My heart was breaking. I'd lost Jeremy, lost the baby. I couldn't handle any more pain. My voice trembled as I reached the hardest part of my confession. A woman at the hospital, Olivia, suggested exchanging babies. She had a baby with no mother, and I accepted. Sean's eyes widened, his face a mask of complete bewilderment. He was very nervous. The silence in the room rang in my ears like a high-pitched whine. You mean I'm not really your son? His voice was hoarse, thick with disbelief. In that moment, I felt the world stop turning. There was no turning back now. The truth lay bare between us, stripped of all pretense. No, but you are my son, Sean. From the day I brought you home, I've loved you with all my heart. That will never change. My voice was gentle, filled with words straight from my heart. You are my son, and you have always been my son. Sean was pacing back and forth in our room. I watched him, my chest tight with emotion, praying he would somehow find a way to accept this truth. Guilt was crushing me, but I knew it had been an act born of love and desperation. After what felt like an eternity, Sean stopped in front of me. Tears welled in his eyes, but didn't fall, and his face showed no hatred, only sadness and confusion. I don't know what to say, he admitted, running his hand through his hair. It feels like everything should change. But at the same time, nothing changes. Because you're my mom. Sean's voice trembled slightly, but he continued. You've always been my mom. At those words, I felt something inside me break and heal simultaneously. The fear I'd carried for so many years finally disappeared. Tears began rolling down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of guilt or pain. They were tears of relief and love. Sean. I whispered, standing up to embrace him. My son hugged me back without hesitation, holding me tight. That embrace seemed to erase all the past pain, confirming everything we'd built together over the years. In that moment, I understood, despite everything, I hadn't lost my son. I love you, Mom, he said, his voice filled with emotion. Nothing's going to change. I held him close and let my tears flow freely. The moment I'd feared for so long had finally arrived. But now, freed from the weight of this secret, I felt a new strength. Sean was my son, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, the sky was clear, but tension still lingered inside me. The trial was reaching its climax, and today's outcome seemed like it would determine the course of my entire life. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my blouse in the mirror. The face reflected back at me showed the fatigue of many emotional battles, but it wasn't the face of someone defeated. I had faced the darkest shadows of my past, and though the wounds were still fresh, I felt stronger than before. Sean's acceptance and last night's embrace had given me the strength I needed. I wasn't alone anymore. I picked up my bag, took a deep breath, and left the apartment. I knew I would face Charles again today, but this wasn't just about winning a legal battle. This was about closing a chapter of my life with dignity, and proving that no one, not even Charles, would ever manipulate me again. When I arrived at the courthouse, the familiar tension wrapped around me, but deep inside was an unshakable determination. The fear that once paralyzed me had been replaced by calm confidence. Understanding what was at stake, I was ready for this day. As I entered the courtroom, I felt the air thick with tension and expectation. The lawyers' arguments and spectators' whispers mixed together, creating a unique energy. Charles sat in his usual place, wearing that facade of superiority. I knew well enough that his composed demeanor was just an act. I took my seat next to my lawyer, who had been a reliable ally throughout this battle. But I knew the final fight was between Charles and me, and I had no intention of losing. The judge entered, and her dignified presence transformed the atmosphere instantly. The proceedings began, and Charles's lawyer repeated his familiar arguments. He tried to paint me as an emotionally unstable woman who never participated in important family decisions. Therefore, he argued, I had no right to the disputed property. I listened quietly, but the anxiety I felt during the first hearing was gone. Charles's lawyer's words rang hollow to me now. The repeated lies no longer affected my heart. The only thing that made me tense was the possibility that Charles might use Sean's secret as his final trump card. But today was different. With everything out in the open, Charles no longer held any power over me. I knew my ex-husband believed in his ability to manipulate people and make himself look favorable. But I knew the truth, and that truth made me invincible against his schemes. My time to testify came. I rose slowly, feeling every eye in the courtroom on me. But this time, instead of feeling judged, I felt liberated to speak my truth without fear. Your Honor, counsel, I began, maintaining my composure. I've spent 20 years in this marriage, and during that time, I've witnessed my ex-husband manipulate situations to his advantage countless times. This case is no exception. The judge watched me intently, taking notes, while Charles's lawyers exchanged worried glances. I continued without hesitation. Charles took our home without my consent, using a carefully planned strategy to deny me rights to the property we built together. But this isn't just about a house. I paused, looking straight at Charles across the Manhattan courtroom. This is about him trying to steal my identity, to deny my existence as a mother and as a woman. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy as Charles crossed his arms, his face showing clear irritation at the direction of my testimony. I kept my eyes on him, my gaze holding both challenge and a touch of pity. I didn't hate him anymore, but I wasn't afraid of him either. My only mistake was trusting someone who never respected or valued what family truly means. My voice rang out, steady and strong. But I won't let that define my future. I'm claiming what's rightfully mine, not just for the property's value, but because it's the right thing to do. This is my right. When I finished speaking, the courtroom fell into a moment of silence that felt like eternity. I took a deep breath, feeling the emotional weight I'd carried for years gradually lifting from my shoulders. I spoke without anger or hatred, just with the conviction of someone who knew the truth. When Charles's lawyer tried to counter, his arguments sounded weak against the power of my testimony. Charles's strategies held no power in the face of the strength and clarity I'd shown. The judge called for a recess to deliberate. I left the courtroom and breathed in the fresh air outside. I'd done everything I could. All that was left was to wait for the result, but I no longer felt defeated. Whatever the outcome, I had reclaimed my voice. That was what mattered most. When the judge returned, her verdict was clear. I was right, the apartment belonged to both Charles and me, and the title change was deemed fraudulent. This victory tasted of justice, but more importantly, it closed my own story. I had won the most important battle, the battle to reclaim my dignity. Charles sat in his chair, avoiding everyone's eyes, his defeat evident. But I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. I had closed a chapter of my life, and that was necessary to move forward. As I left the courthouse, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. The future stretched before me, full of possibilities again. I walked through the soft evening light falling on the Manhattan streets, no longer feeling the weight of the past on my shoulders. This last visit to the courthouse had been to end a difficult chapter in my life. The experience had been unbearable, but I had survived it. I had reclaimed my home, my dignity, and most importantly, my inner peace. Walking through Central Park, I observed the people around me. Children ran around while couples sat on benches, and the murmur of everyday conversations filled the autumn air. The simple normalcy of it all gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. The chaos that had once ruled my life was becoming part of the past. My present, though still new and uncertain, was slowly taking shape. Not far away, Sean and his fiancée Abigail were laughing together, looking peaceful and happy, untouched by the turmoil of my past few months. Seeing my son so relaxed and happy was my greatest personal victory. Even after I revealed everything and told him the long-held truth, Sean hadn't condemned me. Instead of rejecting me, he had accepted me more deeply than I could have ever imagined. Watching him laugh now without reservation, continuing his life, was the greatest gift life could have given me. Mom. Sean waved, beckoning me to join them. I smiled and walked towards them with steady steps. When I reached them, Abigail hugged me as she always did, and Sean gave me that warm smile that filled my heart with pride. They were absorbed in their wedding preparations, which reminded me of my own youthful dreams. I couldn't help but think back to my marriage with Charles, but what I saw in Sean and Abigail's eyes was completely different. Theirs was a pure, love-filled bond based on mutual respect. We sat together on a bench, enjoying casual conversation. Abigail excitedly discussed wedding details, music arrangements, and flower choices. As I listened and participated, my mind wandered to deeper thoughts. Every word from Abigail, every laugh from Sean reminded me how far we'd come. My son was building his own life, one full of love and promise that not even the shadows of the past could destroy. After a while, Sean and Abigail stood up to leave for their next appointment, leaving me in the park. I remained on the bench, watching the scene around me. That's when I felt a familiar presence approaching. Thomas, the man who had entered my life during my darkest times, walked towards me with his gentle smile that could calm my darkest thoughts. "Room for one more?" he asked playfully, settling beside me. I returned his smile with gratitude. Thomas had been my pillar of strength during these most difficult weeks. He was more than just a presence, he was my lighthouse, helping me imagine a fearless new life. "There's always room for you," I replied, leaning contentedly against his shoulder. For a while, we just enjoyed the park's quietness and the simple joy of being together. In that moment, I realized how much my life had changed. The chaos and pain that had tormented me for so long were gradually being replaced by peace and tranquility. "I've been thinking," Thomas broke the silence with his gentle voice that always made me feel everything would be all right. "Maybe it's time to start thinking about what you really want to do? You don't need to be bound by the past anymore. You can control what happens next." I glanced at him sideways, his words resonating within me. Thomas was right, but the concept of thinking about what I really want felt almost foreign to me. For years, my decisions had been dictated by obligation, circumstances, or fear. Now, for the first time in decades, I had the freedom to choose for myself. But what did I truly want? That question had been circling in my mind since the trial ended. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I've spent so long just reacting to whatever life threw at me, I've never really thought about planning my own future." Thomas looked at me, with understanding eyes, seeming to grasp the conflict rising in my heart. For years, I hadn't had time for myself. I had devoted everything to being a mother, survived an emotionally draining marriage, and faced Charles's betrayal. But now, a blank page lay before me, ready to be filled with whatever I chose to write. "There's plenty of time," Thomas answered, gently taking my hand. "Whatever path you choose, I'll be right here with you. This time is for you." I nodded at Thomas's words, feeling the reassurance in his support. For the first time, I noticed the absence of that rushed feeling. There was no need to fight against an invisible clock, no need to hurry. There was just the promise of a better future that I could build myself. We started walking through the park. No words were necessary. Just walking with Thomas made me feel I was no longer in a survival race. I had emerged from those days trapped in a dark tunnel, and now I was looking at the light and possibilities spreading before me. When we returned home later, I paused at the entrance to my apartment, staring at it. This apartment, reclaimed after the fight, was no longer a symbol of the battle itself. Instead, it had become a symbol of my strength, my ability to rise again no matter how difficult the path. Inside, a sense of peace enveloped me. I sat at the table and picked up my phone, enjoying the quietness. There was a message from Sean: "Everything's going great. Love you, Mom. Talk tomorrow." I smiled, my heart filling with love at his message. I watched as Sean built his own future, free from the chains of the past. It gave me a peace I couldn't put into words. A soft breeze from the window caressed my skin, a wind of change, marking the beginning of a new life. In that moment, I truly felt my future was back in my own hands. This time, I was determined to walk my own path, without looking back, without fear. A few days later, I found myself in a small beach house that Thomas had found for us to get away from the city. Waves gently crashed against distant rocks as the golden morning light painted the sky in warm hues. For so long, I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy mornings like this. It had been ages since I'd felt such peace, unburdened by the weight of problems. I walked slowly onto the terrace and closed my eyes, feeling the cool breeze on my face. Taking a deep breath, I realized I'd finally reached a place where I could feel truly free. A place where I could breathe without the invisible chains of the past constricting me. Thomas appeared quietly, offering me one of the 2 coffee cups in his hands. His gentle smile had the power to heal and calm me. We sat side by side in wooden chairs, quietly watching the horizon. I was grateful for Thomas's presence. He had entered my life asking nothing in return, watching over me as I healed at my own pace. His presence was steady yet gentle, helping me rediscover joys I'd forgotten existed. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" Thomas asked quietly, without pressure. I looked at him, still holding my cup, and nodded. "Yes, I have. I'd been reconsidering many things over these past weeks. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was time for me to decide how to use my time going forward. Life had finally given me a reprieve. Now it was up to me to make the most of it. For the first time, I think I know what I want," I said calmly. Thomas watched me, waiting for me to continue. I smiled and went on. "I want to start over. But this time, without looking back, without carrying the sadness. The past won't dictate my future anymore." My voice held a serenity I'd never known before. "I'm not afraid of what happened anymore. I'm ready to close that chapter." Thomas smiled and nodded softly. For him, who knew how much effort it had taken me to get here, seeing this become reality was a source of pride. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "There might still be challenges ahead, but you can face them differently now. You're not alone anymore." I squeezed his hand back with gratitude. But I knew this new path was one I had chosen to walk myself. I had reclaimed my power. I had regained the ability to decide what I wanted and how I wanted to live, and that independent spirit and trust in my own strength felt more important than anything. After a while, we stood up and began walking along the beach. We walked along the water's edge, feeling the warm sand beneath our feet. The ocean seemed to bring new feelings with it. It felt as if the passing waves were washing away the remnants of pain, making room for new things and unexpected joys. For the first time, I felt my life was overflowing with possibilities. There were no limits anymore, no fears holding me back. Back at the house, I checked my phone and found a message from Sean. He was excited about a new project after finishing an important meeting. I smiled, realizing he too had started walking his own path. Having overcome the burden of secrets that had lain between us for years, Sean was moving forward with confidence. His happiness gave me a peace I couldn't describe in words. But as I was about to put the phone back in my pocket, I felt something strange. It felt like a moment of slight fatigue at first, but the sensation gradually grew stronger. Instinctively, I placed my hand on my stomach and caught my breath at the feeling. Thomas. I called his name in a voice of disbelief. Startled by my tone, Thomas rushed to my side. "What's wrong?" he asked with concern. At first, I couldn't find the words, but gradually a smile began to spread across my face of surprise. "I think I'm pregnant," I whispered, hardly believing my own words. Thomas's face showed a mixture of surprise, joy, and bewilderment. It was completely unexpected news. Though unplanned, it seemed to fit perfectly with the new life we were building together. My heart was wrapped in a whirlwind of emotions, but there was no fear. The past was finally where it belonged, in the past, and now was the time to look to the future. Time to build a new life I hadn't even imagined. "How do you feel?" Thomas asked softly, gently holding my hand. He was trying to process the magnitude of the news he'd just heard. "Strangely happy," I answered with a quiet laugh. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I feel like everything will be all right." We embraced, feeling the warmth of this new hope surrounding us. I understood. Life always brings surprises, whether filled with pain or joy. But this time, I was ready to accept whatever came. My rebirth wasn't just emotional anymore, it was taking form as new life within me. It symbolized my new beginning. As the sun shone brightly and waves endlessly washed against the shore, I felt that the future I had wanted was finally within my reach.